Hi, I'm Greg,
And I'm Leanne.
and we're making a little compilation video about our travels in Kenya, in Africa. So we're going to talk about our experiences that we had there, both good and bad, offer some travel advice, and hopefully everybody takes a little something home. Our trip took place between July and August of 2012. We traveled through a good portion of southern and eastern Kenya on our travels, and we had a wonderful little stopover in Amsterdam on the way. Nice long day-long layover. We were in Kenya for 1 month. We spent 3 weeks of it volunteering and 1 week traveling the east coast of Kenya, and it was a remarkable experience, and we want to share that. So let's talk about the good.
Well, definitely the thing that I think was the most uplifting part about going to Kenya was the original reason why we went there, which was to go volunteer in an orphanage. When we got there, we very soon realized that our main purpose wasn't necessarily to improve the orphanage or to fundraise or to clean up after the kids. It was essentially to love the kids and to play with the kids. Because even though they were quite well taken care of at the orphanage we were at, they still really weren't getting that love that you would hope that any kid has available to them. So we spent the vast majority of our days just playing with the kids from 8 a.m. until sometimes 4 or 5 p.m. A little bit exhausting, especially for Greg. The kids kind of treated them as their personal jungle gym. But
So bodybuilder.
but it was really amazing. Just being able to hear them laugh and knowing what they've been through and what they go through every day in their lives, and that they're still able to make that really beautiful sound.
We brought them gifts, small things like pencils, erasers, books, clothing that a student from your school made, and we had some construction projects. We built them a soccer net. We built them a garden with the money that we brought. But our real contribution was improving their outlook, their moods, doing a little bit of teaching. But that was our contribution. Wasn't the original intent, but that's what ended up being our contribution to that small community. We definitely love those kids and miss them dearly. So they definitely improved our outlook. And one special little thing that I really liked was we'd walk around town, and I'm used to getting stared at because I have a silly mustache. But in Kenya, you can double that because there's so few white people. And the one sentence that every small child knew was, "How are you? How are you?"
And it was pretty cute because we would be walking anywhere and all of a sudden you would have these horde of children literally chasing you down the street, yelling and screaming, "How are you? How are you?" While we were in Kenya, we were lucky enough to be able to go on a safari 4 days. And we spent 3 days in the Masai Mara, which was extremely beautiful.
That's a national park.
And 1 day at Lake Nakuru, which was a little bit farther north in Kenya,
Yes.
where we saw rhinos.
Yeah, we saw a lot of large animals, a lot of things there's very few places you can see them. There are a lot of the big five are all animals that are going extinct. They're not necessarily large, which I learned on the trip.
I have to admit, there were times when we were on our trip that I got really discouraged, because it really felt like white people were just a walking wallet in some ways. And a lot of people had that expectation, not just the people that were native to Kenya, but white people who had moved to Kenya thought that white people were a walking wallet. But the one thing that I found really inspirational was when local people would go above and beyond
Lawrence?
to help out their own people. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I really liked about Sonata was that pretty much every employee there at one point in time had volunteered their services, and most of the so-called teachers although we never actually saw the men teach anything, had pretty much all come from the streets themselves. So it was pretty inspirational to see people like Mr. Dan, who has been training to get his degree in psychology and counseling to help out the kids at Sonata. And to see him share the stories of the kids always trying to spread their cause, and to hear about the work that he was doing in the slums of Gilgil. He would go out there every night just to talk with the people, to hear what their problems are, to see if there were solutions. And it's a systemic issue, so definitely nothing's easy. And I'm sure that what he was doing would be so incredibly disheartening. But he was out there all the time.
One other wonderful experience that we had was just prior to going on safari, we went on an outreach program to the Maasai lands.
Maasai lands.
The Maasai are a local or native Kenyan tribe who still live the old way of life. They live in stick and mud huts.
Called Minyatas.
Yeah, cooking over like natural built fires. They're pastoral, so I learned. They'll farm their own, like they'll have cows and goats to make their own milk. They really just kind of look after themselves. They're craftspeople too, as a source of income. So they
The
can
women
have
are.
some gifts. They all had cell phones. While we were on Maasai outreach, we had some really, really wonderful experiences. We got to see how the Maasai people live, see one of their schools. Now, the Maasai have a real patriarchy, antiquated patriarchy, what we would consider backwards society. Now, a woman is an object, naturally. You know that. That's basically what they believe. So basically, if you have a daughter, you will sell her to the man who offers you the right dowry, being a dozen goats or what have you. And this one woman, Maggie, rose above that, wouldn't allow her father to sell her to whatever man, went and got educated. She's now a nurse, came back to her community, started up this clinic that's run by the government. And the day that we were there, she saved a man's life who hacked his leg with a machete. And she changed at least a few minds in that local community that of how wonderful women are.
Mm-hmm. It's quite typical in the Maasai tribe for girls as young as 12 or 14 to be married off. They are also polygamists. So it's quite typical for a man to have multiple wives. And basically the standard is the more cattle or goats a man has, the more wives he probably has. Because number of children are considered to be signs of a man's success and virility. So, antiquated. One of Maggie's other projects was to create a girls' dormitory for girls in the Maasai land. It's very traditional for women in the Maasai land, young girls in the Maasai land, not to complete any type of education past grade 4 or grade 5.
Because they have to help out at home.
Yes, because they're expected to help out their mothers, and after grade 7 or grade 8, they're getting married off. So one of the biggest problems in the Maasai land is everyone is spread so far apart, just like the settlers were here in Saskatchewan back when Saskatchewan was settled. So what Maggie ended up doing is she realized that one of the greatest problems these girls faced is they'd be walking 2 hours to school in the morning and 2 hours back home every single day. So walking 4 hours a day. And along that trip, they would come across men who viewed these women as objects. And Maggie said it was fairly common for a girl to engage in sexual acts on the way to school or back home from school, not because she necessarily wanted to, but because she was forced to. So what Maggie decided to do is she created a girls' dormitory. So they actually have girls now that are in grade 10, which is the oldest group of girls they've ever had at that school before, simply because they have a place where they can live. So they don't have to make that 4-hour walk every day and have to encounter those dangers along the way. And it's pretty inspirational that she uplifted herself from her surroundings through education, and now she's allowing other girls in the Maasai community to do the same.
The dormitory that they built was courtesy of a volunteer that had come. And that volunteer raised, I think it was a girl, right?
Yep.
She raised a whole bunch of money for back home, or asked her friends back home to help raise money for this dormitory, and that was the work that that was her legacy in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that'll be her last time there either. When you put in an effort like that, it was really, really good to see. My favorite experience in Kenya was our campfire with the Maasai men. So while we were staying at Maggie's dormitory, we just had a fire one evening, and we all kind of sat around chatting. There was a couple of Maasai men that spoke very little English.
Teachers.
And a few teachers that did speak English. And we got to talking about our ways of life, and it was a real eye-opening experience. First of all, they were shocked that a 20-something charmer isn't married with as many kids as she could possibly have. Their goals in life are completely different than ours. It's get as many wives as you can, have as many children as you can. That's your success.
They were also shocked that I was a principal, because in their world, a woman would never be in any type of leadership or authority role whatsoever.
Yeah.
Women are in the home.
Really interesting part of the conversation was when we got to sex lives. There was a very open and frank discussion, and quite frankly,
in fact, there were illustrations drawn in the dirt to explain the sexual practices.
Maasai people practice genital mutilation, circumcision on men, and FGM on women. That's female genital mutilation. They remove the clitoris.
Yes. And in the more serious cases, the ones that they try not to talk about because even they realize that it's fairly wrong, they actually sew shut the woman's opening. So she, for two reasons. One, because it supposedly grants more pleasure to the husband. And two, it supposedly makes sex unpleasurable for her.
Maasai men never see their wives naked. Sex is not for pleasure, it's for making offspring. You like they're polygamists. But they only copulate in the dark. That's awful.
Yes.
Sex isn't for pleasure. They claim that when they do circumcisions, he was trying to explain they leave a little like flap of skin under the penis. No.
This is how the conversation went. They were telling us about female genital mutilation, and I think I said something along the lines of, but how is that justified, or how is that fair, or something like that. And his response was, well, this is what we do to make up for... I cut him off, and I'm like, no. Nothing makes up for losing a clitoris.
It's pronounced clitoris.
And then he continued to draw a picture in the sand.
Yeah. And one gentleman also brought up, he was very broken English, but he brought up that he asked if we allowed men to marry men in our country, and he just couldn't wrap his head around the fact that that would make some people happy. It's remarkable. Let's talk about the bad stuff.
Okay.
Everything in Kenya was really, really poorly built. I didn't see like anything that was well built, with the exception of a few Western malls, which had been like, they bring contractors in from outside of Kenya. But basically, Kenyan workmanship, I'm not afraid to say, was absolute shit.
Greg's favorite comment. Good enough.
That was Kenya's motto. You building the wall. Hey, there's your concrete bag is still in your mortar. Good enough, close enough. We're done for today. The living situation in Kenya was pretty bad. The complete lack of infrastructure, the need for civil engineers there is ridiculous. There was no drainage of any kind whenever it rained, and it did rain. All the streets would be flooded. Topsoil would just erode all over the place. There was a complete lack of sanitation in pretty much everywhere.
On our walk home every day, we got to walk through a nice back alley. When it rained, it became a very nice muddy back alley. We walked by outhouses. Pretty sure we had to walk through some sewage mud. And that was typical.
There was so much begging everywhere you went. Everyone, give me $5, give me $5. It's not good. On our way to Kenya, when we stopped in Amsterdam, we stayed at what's known as the worst hotel in the world, the Hans Brinkler Budget Hotel. They advertise themselves as the worst in the world. We were expecting bad. What we got was better than most everything we saw in Kenya.
It was better than luxury in Kenya. Kenya is religious. Extremely religious. A common question that people would ask us is, do you go to church? And the answer should always be yes, because if the answer was no, they would instantly say, why not? In a very...
Like a grandma.
Yeah, like a grandma. Fundamentalist grandma. Everyone went to church. Churches were all over the place. There was probably a church every 2 blocks in Gilgal.
They were shitty, though.
Yeah. Where we stayed with Mary and Kate, they were very religious. We had gospel television on 24/7. We would wake up to it at 6 in the morning, and we would go to sleep with it at 10 p.m. at night. And their fundamentalist belief in Christianity was so ignorant. Example being, one morning we were watching TV, and on TV there was a woman, and she was shaking like you would see at an evangelical church, and she was shaking, and she's like, I've been cured. And so, of course, it draws in our attention. We're like, oh, what's she talking about? Apparently, God cured her of AIDS. That is a common belief. You can pray away AIDS. You can pray away deformities. You can pray away poverty, tithing. So, in other words, giving that minimal amount of money that you actually do have away to the church will grant you access into heaven. It's very, very fundamentalist Christian, and it is scary that they actually believe that you can pray away AIDS.
Yeah.
And is it really any wonder why there's 3 million children orphaned in Kenya alone because their parents have died of AIDS?
Yeah. Let's talk about education.
Atrocious. I'm a teacher. I was very excited to go to the school. It broke my heart once I got there. We were lucky enough to be able to go to a public primary school. Public education in Kenya is free. However, to move on to the next grade, you have to write exams. Those exams cost money. To go to school, you have to wear a uniform. Those uniforms cost money. So even though education was supposedly free, many people could not get an education. Many kids could not get an education because they couldn't afford the 20 Canadian dollars it was for a uniform, or the 100 Canadian dollars it was to write exams at the end of the year. And their money was not well spent. The public school that we went to, it is typical in Kenya for one teacher to have 100 students in their class. Typically, they sit about 4 to a desk. They have one textbook for all of their classes that's maybe that big.
All the basics: history, social sciences, math, religious studies, of course.
Christian ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taught in a public school. So typically 4 to a desk, one pencil. They might have one notebook. That's about it. The teachers there were rarely in class in the public school. The kids were quite well behaved, even though the teachers were never there, because
if you're an authority figure, they would listen.
Because the
Mzungu.
Education is actually a luxury, even though it's supposedly free. But it's not really a surprise that the teachers didn't put in the effort when you consider the school day started at 7 a.m. and it would go until 4 p.m. and then there would be 1 hour of activities after school. And school went essentially year-round. I think when I was talking to the girls, in terms of holidays, they only ever really had 1 month when you added up all their little holidays all together. And not only that, but teachers in Kenya made about 130 Canadian dollars a month. IDP stands for internally displaced persons. So essentially what it was, as I talked about, because of the post-election violence, a lot of people were left without homes, and they were essentially refugees in their own country. So what the government did is they set up IDP camps.
Yeah, being a refugee in your own country. The huts were the worst of what I saw built in Kenya. Just like, it was like potato bags stretched over pieces of wood that you chopped off a tree, put together with some cloth, and just like that's where they lived. Their beds were nothing more than that either.
Yeah, they lived in probably 8x8 tents.
Maybe 2 meters.
Okay. And they would share that with a husband and a wife and a grandma and grandpa and a baby.
Kids, yeah. 1 meal a day if they were lucky, and it was all starch foods. Nothing. The food in Kenya overall was meh.
Yeah.
Left us feeling without energy and unmotivated, and explains a few things, but not.
I have to say, at the IDP camp, we did definitely see the worst of the worst that there was to see. I mean, this is a camp that's funded by the Kenyan government. And yet they could only manage to feed them once a day. That's all they provided them with rations for. I think the most disheartening thing about visiting Kenya was, even though I felt like what we were doing was fabulous, even though I looked around and I saw the good that other volunteers were doing, it's still not enough. It was heartbreaking to realize that every day we were there was one day closer to when we would have to leave, and know that even if we did make those kids smile, even if we did provide them with a garden that will help supplement their diets, it's still not enough.
That garden probably didn't grow anyways. It was really awful soil.
Yeah. But it's so systemic. It's everywhere you look.
I had to poop in a hole.
You just take this one.
Flushing toilets were a rarity in Kenya. The outhouses, no benches were used to, just a small little hole in the ground. And I went for several weeks without having to use one, and I finally had to. That sucked. It was awful. That's what I meant by lack of sanitation. I know you experienced it too.
Oh yeah, my aim got real good.
General travel advice would be to learn at least a little bit of the language of the locals.
Learn more than a little bit.
At least a little bit. I learned some decent Swahili, and I got pretty good while I was there.
Well, and not only that, but it's a go-between for you and the locals. Like, they loved making fun of Greg because he couldn't pronounce the words right, according to them.
Lewa Kiswahili kidogo.
And it just...
Asante sana, mama.
Instantly, they just thought he was the most adorable Mzungu ever because he attempted to be friendly with them in their own language, and it's definitely not an experience they frequently have. You could tell.
Yeah. So make the effort to learn their language. Talk to locals.
Oh, definitely talk to locals.
If you can, stay with locals. Live how they live. Live where they are. You learn nothing going to an all-inclusive. You learn nothing about the culture by not seeing how people are and talking to them. You can't go and just see a tourist attraction and have an idea of what a country's like.
Yeah. I feel like that was the best experiences I had. Talking with our house moms, Mary and Kate, finding out firsthand about post-election violence.
Hearing about the shit they saw.
Yeah, the things they saw. Talking with the teachers in the Masai Mara. Enlightening, because you're able to take in culture and knowledge and information that a tourist trip will never give you. Yeah. A lot of people go to Kenya to go on safari. Good for you. But that's not Africa, and that's not Kenya.
A problem with a lot of trips, especially all-inclusive, is they're very fake. And what turned that all around for me was our discussion with the Maasai teachers. Having that open and frank discussion and connecting with people from such a different culture was absolutely unbelievable. And it's not I just gave myself goosebumps. I would never have learned that if I just went to Kenya and went on safari. If I would have just gone and volunteered in an orphanage or whatever. I mean, that's a good experience in itself. What really turned it around was sitting and talking to those locals, just opening up, having a frank discussion, and I really, really loved that about the trip.
Asking them about what matters to them. Mr. Dan told us the systemic issues in society. Maggie told us about how women have very few to no rights. The Maasai men told us about Maasai culture. Even our tour guides told us a little bit, not much because they're still part of the tour, but they told us a little bit about how desperate people are, the everyday person, to just try and make something of themselves. For those who do work, especially in the tourism industry, they work so hard. Yeah. It's amazing what they're willing to do for their tourists. The best tip that we got from Greg's aunt and uncle, who have visited Kenya a few times on a ferry and had a very different experience than what we have had.
They had a 5-star experience. We had a...
Half star?
Is there 0 star?
Anyways, they told us to, instead of trying to make our flights back to back, to keep the layover in Amsterdam, and we hadn't even thought about it. So we were lucky enough, and we got a 24-hour layover in Amsterdam, and we jam-packed that 24 hours worth of red light district.
Yeah, so use your layovers whenever you can. We flew 10,000 kilometers, split into 2, made it a very delightful experience. Yeah. One very important thing when traveling is your attitude.
Yes.
Now, our very first day volunteering, we traveled to Kenya. We flew into Nairobi, 10,000 kilometer trip, 2-hour drive to Gilgil. We're ready to start volunteering. First day in the orphanage is fine. We start walking home, and it fucking pours.
Torrential downpour.
We decided to try and make it home. Roads are completely flooded up to your calves.
Sewage water flooded up to your calves.
We're in flip-flops trying to get home. Now, there's 2 different attitudes you can take. You and I had a blast. We loved it. It was a shitty situation, but I'm the kind of guy that if it's freezing rain while I'm cycling into the wind, I'm laughing the whole time. And you and I had a wonderful attitude, and we just had a blast jumping through puddles and slipping in the mud, and it didn't matter what happened. Your attitude makes all the difference. If you go in looking for luxury, you're going to be sorely disappointed. If you go in experiencing whatever and loving life, that is so crucial. Along the same lines, the best advice I can give is find an awesome fucking travel companion. That's what absolutely made this trip for me. I wouldn't have been going volunteering in Kenya if I didn't have Leanne to go with me, and she's quite the travel companion. So if you have the opportunity,
get your own Leanne.
Get your own Leanne. You can try and steal mine, but it's not going to happen. But yeah, she really did make all the difference in the trip, and that's the best advice I can give.
Aww.
While we were on our trip, I told her a very sincere quote from me, and I told her life's not going to be long enough for all of the adventures we're going to have. That's traveling.